Hi, I'm Nick Coman, and we have a class you're just gonna love. In this Dragonfly Creative class, I teach you how to make a pieced bias scarf, because who doesn't love scarves? This easy-to-make scarf is a great way to use special fabrics without having to use a lot of yardage. Even fabrics that you might avoid, like chiffons or satins, they're easy to tame with this method. While this scarf hangs on the bias, it's sewn on the straight of grain, so it's easy to sew up and they make great gifts. I hope you'll enjoy taking this class as much as I enjoyed teaching it. So if you're ready to learn and get creative, I look forward to seeing you in class soon. Hi, I'm Nick Coman with Dragonfly Creative, and today we're gonna make a bias pieced scarf. Right here we have the sample. This is a little mini sample. This is made out of a silk crepe. It's absolutely beautiful. It drapes nicely. It's a doubled scarf, so you don't have to worry about what's the front and what's the back. And I'm going to show you two different versions of this. I'm going to show you a solid version, and then I'm going to show you a pieced version. The solid version will get your sewing skills really solid, and then the pieced version will give you all sorts of creative ideas. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is decide how long you want your scarf to be. There's a little formula that will help you figure out the length of the scarf in relationship to the width. So the finished width of the piece of fabric that you're going to start with, the finished width, not including the seam allowances, needs to be divisible into the length of the scarf. So a simple way to figure that is if your width of your fabric to start with is 4 inches, then that needs to be divisible into whatever length you're going to do. So it would need to be divisible into 8 inches or 16 or 24 or 36. It would need to be divisible into that number. So whatever number the length of your scarf is needs to be divisible by that 4. Or if it's 6 or if it's 12, I've got a 12-inch finished width here. So I cut it at 12.5, so I would have a 1/4 inch seam on either side. And then we're gonna sew this 2 strips together because I cut it right across the width of the fabric. And once we sew them together, I'm gonna measure and see exactly how much we got. And then we'll decide how long we want the scarf from there. So if you have a 45-inch width of fabric, you sew 2 together and you're gonna have 90 inches to deal with. So you just figure out a number that's divisible into 90 or something close to it, under 90, and you'll have the width and length of your scarf. Okay, let's start. So I'm taking my 2 12.5-inch pieces that I've cut completely across the grain, and I'm going to put them right sides together, or correct sides together, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Now I didn't worry about back tacking on this, simply because I'm going to be stitching over this seam again, so I didn't need to worry about it. So I've got that sewn. Now what I'm going to do is take it to the iron and press it open. And this fabric is a really pretty 100% rayon. It was made in Germany. And it's a really lovely print. On one side, it's almost like marbled paper. And it's over a floral digital print. So it's very interesting. It's very fun. Anyway, so we've got that seam going. Now, we're gonna measure out how much we have left. So I take my trusty tape measure. I measure my length. Okay. Okay, so I'm at 53 inches at that seam that's down the center. Okay, so we have the two pieces sewn together. We've measured them out, and from this end to the center seam is 53 inches, and that gives me 106 total. So what we need to do now is figure out what I can do for length with a 12-inch width. So 12 times 9 would be, that would be 90, and 18, so that would be 108. We only have 106 inches, so I need to go at 8. So 12 times 8 would be 80, and then 16 inches, which would be 80, 96. So we're gonna have to cut this at 96 plus a half an inch. So it's gonna have to be 96 inches and a half, okay? Now, I think I want the seam in the center back of my neck. So if I'm going to do 96 and a half inches, I need to divide that in half. So that's 48 and a quarter inches that I measure from the center seam, and then I'm going to measure 48 and a quarter inches down, and then we're gonna just cut that off, and that will be the final length of the scarf, because that'll give us the 96 and a half. Okay, now what did I say? I said we needed 48 and a quarter inches, and that's going to give us 96 and a half, okay? So I'm just going to take my trusty tape and measure out here. Now, you're probably getting that this is a pretty forgiving kind of process, okay? So that's 48 and a quarter, and I'm going to take and mark my fabric, okay? And then just for ease of doing, I'm going to actually measure up from the bottom and see how much that is from the bottom. And so that's actually 4 3/4 or 12.5 centimeters. Even though we aren't using centimeters for the rest of the scarf, if it's a good measure, it's a good measure. And I happen to have the centimeters on that side of the tape. So don't make things harder than they need to be. So I've got my little mark here. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clip my fabric together so that it stays put. And then I'm going to just cut that excess off. And I'm clipping above it and below it. And I know this is the scary part, but you can do it. So when you start cutting, look at the mark you made on the other side. Don't look at your scissors. It's sort of like walking. You don't look at your feet when you're walking. You look where you're going. So the same thing happens with scissors. We look where I'm cutting, and then I'm going to get a nice straight line all the way through there. So now I've cut that off, and we're ready to start sewing. So now that we've cut it to length, what we need to do is figure out how to get it from on the straight of grain to on the bias grain. So I'm going to show you the trick for that right now. We're going to take one corner and fold it down at a 45-degree angle, and we're going to make it across there. So it's like we're starting a triangle fold or a flag fold. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my little clips in here just to hold this together, because this is going to be the first seam that we're going to sew. And this is going to be a 1/4 inch seam. And you'll notice it's the cross grain sewn to the straight of grain. And then I've also made a small mark down here at the very bottom telling me where my 1/4 inch seam is. So my 1/4 inch mark is right here. Can you see that? The little blue cross. That's a 1/4 inch away from this seam and a 1/4 inch away from the bottom seam. We're going to stop this seam with the needle down right in that blue point. Okay? Let's start sewing. I'm going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. I'm going to back tack just a couple of stitches. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew that at that 1/4 inch seam allowance until we get down to my blue point, and then at that point I'm going to stop with the needle in that blue point that gives me my 1/4 inch intersection. Okay, I'm coming up on my intersection here, and then I'm going to put my needle down, and there we go. So I'm right in the 1/4 inch intersection on that blue, and we've got this beginning seam sewn. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my bunny off here. Now is the part where we get to go to the bias cut.